Hello everybody, my name is Suzanne Stanard and I'm a writer with the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at NC State. I'm really happy to be here today working with you guys on writing press releases and columns. Thanks for being here. Before we get started, I want to make sure to say that if you'd like to stop me at any point to ask questions, feel free to do so. Lou is monitoring the message board and she can let me know when questions come in. So I want this to be a conversation as best we can here online. And for you to feel free to stop me at any point with questions or comments. So here we go. My goals for the session this morning are to help you understand who the media are and what qualifies as news. It's also important for us to talk about the value of telling stories, getting your message out, especially in an organization as impactful as Cooperative Extension. There are so many great stories in Extension, and you guys are on the ground making these stories happen, seeing them, and can report on them to really great benefit to you and the organization. We'll talk about when it's best to use a press release. In lots of cases, it's not entirely necessary, especially with digital media the way it is today, social media. Not all news requires a full formal press release. So we'll talk about best case scenarios there for using press releases. And then I'll walk through the mechanics of writing good press releases and columns, structure and content, and they're actually pretty similar in the way that they're written, but there are big differences that you should know. And then the last thing we'll go through is how best to distribute them, because you don't want to have gone to all that trouble and then have it end up in the wrong hands or be sent at a really bad time when no one's going to see it. So we'll talk about all the factors that go into distribution and how best to get your news out there. All right, who are the media? For most of our purposes for today, we're going to be talking about digital publishing because it seems that most folks are consuming news through the web, through apps, through social media channels on their phones, and that is only growing. So I really want to be thinking ahead on that and prepare you guys to write in that way for that audience through the web. And it's interesting, Extension's website has a terrific portal for publishing blog posts and publishing digital content. So you guys actually have a really nice setup ready and waiting for you. So we'll walk through that later. And I have some examples of folks in Extension who are doing a really good job with using that blog posting mechanism on the Extension website. But we cannot forget about our tried and true traditional media, especially in our rural communities, in our small towns across the state. Daily and weekly newspapers are still the primary source for information for a lot of people, radio and TV as well. So we'll dig deeper into these different types of media later and how best to reach them, but we're generally going to write for all of these types of media. So here I mentioned earlier about digital news consumption. It seems that according to this information from Pew, nearly half of Americans are getting their news online, and that does include TV and video. We're actually doing a lot of focus on video through our website here at the college level because it's becoming so popular and only growing. You'll see that newspapers are pretty low, but they're still strong, and they are not gone yet. I know that it seems that it's becoming obsolete, but it really isn't. A lot of folks still read the newspaper, but they might just be reading it online these days. So this gives you a quick glimpse of how folks consume their news. And I know this slide's a little meaty, so Lou says here that you'll have access to all the slides after our presentation is over. They'll live online, so you can revisit this one and dig a little deeper if you'd like.
All right. When you're thinking about talking to the media, remember that reporters are not your ultimate audience. They're a conduit to the people you want to reach most, which in our case could be anyone from a consumer to a farmer to another specialist. So say if you're a hort agent, you're talking to master gardeners or just people who are also horticulturalists. So just keep in mind that the media are not the end. They are helping us get our message to the people we most want to reach. And with that said, it's important before you set out to write a press release or a column to understand who exactly you want to reach. It's easy in our world to say, oh, we want to hit the general public, but it's really important to define that as narrowly as you can, because that in turn helps shape your writing and your distribution strategy and helps you achieve your goal. And also as you go, keep in mind, of course, what's important to your audience. And as something comes to the table that you think is newsworthy or that you would like to share, always think about your audience first. Will this be important to them? Will it resonate with them? How does this help Extension? Why should we even bother to put our stuff into the news? Clearly, it elevates awareness of who we are. Simply having Cooperative Extension, NC State Extension, in a newspaper, mentioned on the radio or television, it's just that impression. It makes impressions, and the more we can do that, the better. It also demonstrates Extension's role as a partner, as a leader in the community, and I think it strengthens those partnerships and helps build community. You know, everything we do is focused on extending knowledge and improving lives, and the more we can get that message out, the better. And it also engages your audiences, especially when you have issues of interest or events, special topics that you think they need to know about. It helps mobilize people and bring them together. So there are definitely a lot of significant benefits to getting Extension in the news. Why us? And here I touched on this a little bit earlier. You know, Extension is all about awareness, education, communicating, delivering knowledge, information, and that goes hand in hand with media relations. It's a key component of getting the word out about what we do and who we are and how we help. So I won't read all of these bullets, but I know you all know this like the backs of your hands. But, you know, we're accountable, we're accessible, it's our responsibility to communicate as much information as possible, and also to position Extension in the minds of citizens and in the media as a leader in these areas, and to demonstrate all that we do for all kinds of people across the state. Now, what's news? This is a good question to ask before you set out on the task of writing a press release, and it's often something I have to ask myself every day because I constantly have people coming to me with story ideas, and you have to really be able to filter out what is news and what really isn't. So is the piece timely? Is it something happening right now that you think has an immediate need? Will it change or improve lives? Will it create a reaction among your audience? Will they care? Will they connect with it? Oops, I have a, okay. Will it resonate with them? And of course, does it have a local angle? So you want to be sure that this piece of information that you'd like to share, it makes sense to share it with folks in your area. You know, for instance, just this is a very basic example, but you know, a lot of the disaster relief happening right now clearly wouldn't be relevant to folks in the mountains in most cases. So keep in mind your audience and their interests and their need for the information and how it relates to them. The compelling C's of news, I'll let you read these. I think in our case, we're looking at the very last one, human interest. When I think about Extension, I think about people helping people. Of course, people helping animals, people helping plants grow, all kinds of things like that. But this is really our niche. It's our opportunity to get into the news is through these human interest stories. You know, all the others are awfully negative. And of course, when you look at crisis and you know, think about what's happening right now in the state, we are making efforts to communicate, but it's all positive. It's educational, how to recover your home, how to recover your field, all those types of information. We're sharing Extension publications and resources. So while the reason for the news is crisis, our communication efforts are all positive on rebuilding and helping and communicating those pieces of information to people who need it most, people who really don't know what even the first step should be in recovering their home after a flood. So let's just keep in mind that it's unfortunate that a lot of the news does focus on the negative. I especially can't stand to watch the evening news in my own home, but we have a real opportunity here in Extension to share good news, and that's exciting. What's not news? The biggest takeaway here, and the issue I deal with a lot here on campus, is that things that are very internal to us are not necessarily news to external audiences. So in most cases, and we get a lot of this, which is very good news for the college, but grant and award stories, and in fact, unless the grant clears a certain dollar amount by university standard, we're not really supposed to push it out through a press release at all. We're allowed to put it out through our own channels, our own website, our own social media, but it needs to be a pretty big deal to warrant media relations effort. At the same time, though, if you have a small grant that has a really interesting angle or a really big impact, then that will qualify. And I'll give an example here. Several years ago, we had a scholarship created by a family connected to the college who wanted to create opportunities for children of migrant workers, and it wasn't a huge groundbreaking dollar amount, but it was a really interesting story because nothing like that had ever been done. And indeed, when we sent it out, we got immediate reaction from the local newspaper wanting to know more about it, wanting to talk to some of the students who had won the scholarship. So if you think about it in those terms, is it unique? Does it have a big impact? Then the dollar amount doesn't necessarily matter. Other things that don't really qualify as news are internal announcements like retirements, promotions, new hires. I have collaborations and partnerships on here, but that also has an exception because if the partnership is resulting in a really neat project, then that most definitely is news. An example there is I just covered a story about 2 extension agents who are partnering with local parks, recreation, and tourism departments, health services, and others to embark on a big grant to combat obesity. And the grant award amount was not, I mean, it's big to me because I don't have $1 million, but but it's not in the news world, unfortunately, it's not a huge amount, but the impact that the grant will have and the different agencies working together, that was news. So we did put that out as a release. So you really have to use your judgment when you're thinking about what qualifies as news and doesn't qualify as news, excuse me. And this last point here just kind of sums it all up, that extension is all about impact, and that's where I think we have so many good stories to tell. Lives changed, communities improved, challenges resolved. So if that's the basis for your story, then it absolutely is newsworthy. Do I need a press release? This is something that I ask myself a lot because, like I said, we have so much news coming at us. We have to make sure that the correct information is going out the door to the media. So with that said, it's always good advice not to do it just because you think it needs to be done, just to do it, just to appease someone or, you know, sure, that might be okay. Make sure you're doing it for a good reason and trust your gut on that. You know, when expertise is required, absolutely, that would be an appropriate channel, a press release. And again, with collaboration, we are always in a position to be a community partner, be a leader, and if a press release can help accomplish that, then I think it's definitely worthwhile. When can it work? I feel like I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry. When content dictates, so like we've said, when it's relevant to your audience, when you think there's a substantial angle there, when it ties into your local community, if it's real news. And especially with extension reporters, and especially in these local communities, they tend to know who we are and they want to work with us. They look to us as experts, and I think that's an opportunity in itself. Just today I had a conversation with a woman who used to be a reporter for the News and Observer here in Raleigh, and she now runs a health-based website And I guess it's sort of like a blog. She still considers herself to be a journalist, obviously, and she's covering things in a very different way. But she made a point to tell me how often she looks to Extension for her content, for those resources. So do know that that is making a difference, and that those folks, if they don't already know, they'll be happy to receive that information from us, those resources and that information. When it fails, when it's not news, and I love this adage, it won't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. So again here, you need to ask yourself why this is newsworthy, why you think it is, how it pertains to your audiences, and what impact it'll have, what the result will be. And if you can't come up with answers to those questions, it's probably not newsworthy. Timing also can be an issue. You know, again, I'll go to the flooding example. We've been holding some stories for publication out of sensitivity to those communities. And one, in fact, deals with it's a really wonderful story about a green space project that's turning an otherwise boring and ordinary pavement project on the side of a road into a space that will retain water and enliven the community and bring vibrancy to downtown. But we finished filming the story the Friday before Hurricane Matthew hit, and it's packaged, it's ready to go, it's been written, but we cannot push this out right now because it's not good timing. It's not appropriate, and so we're going to wait on that. So just keep that in mind as well. That's the thing about news is I can't tell you how many times I've had a great story ready to go and then had to hold it, or we've had a great event planned and then some crisis occurs here in Raleigh and all our press who promised to come end up not showing up. So timing, unfortunately, is a key factor. And in many cases, too, a press release isn't always necessary, especially if you have relationships with your local reporters. I have good relationships here with a handful of folks, and if I see something that I think is a neat story, that a couple sentences, a quick note will suffice, and they would much prefer me do that than spin my wheels writing a press release. So that's a nice thing to think of. You can still reach out to reporters without the formality of a press release. And the last bullet here, of course, is if it's the wrong tactic for your audience, if it just won't work, if it's not the right way to reach your people, then it's not going to work. All right, I'm going to stop and take a breath here. I don't see anything in the chat area for questions. Okay.
We don't have any questions yet.
All right.
But if you all do, yeah, find your little hand above the above my name. There's a little hand up there. So does anybody want to put in a question right at this moment? And if you do, go ahead and click that, and we'll call on you. I'll give you just a second here.
I feel like we're on a podcast. This is fun.
It is fun. Yeah. April may have a question.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Sometimes you can see it looks like Danielle, maybe Denise. We'll see if they have a question.
Okay. Great.
So if you write it in the chat, let's see.
Okay. Danielle, I see your question about photos. That's a great question. And I have an answer that you might not like. Yes and no. Photos can definitely help add. And I'm going to explain both sides here. The part of it that's difficult is when you send photos with a release as part of the initial pitch, they often cause the email to get caught in spam filters and not delivered to the reporters. So what I would suggest, and what's worked for me, if you have a really good picture, the media are always appreciative of that because it saves them the time and trouble to have to go out and get their own. I would write that into the release, and I'll show you here as we get further on. Even a note at the top that says, I have a photo available. If you'd like it, let me know and I'll send it to you. That way they know to look for it. They know it's coming. But if you tack it on to the initial release or embed it into the email or the Word file, it can cause it to actually not be delivered, and it can jumble up your copy, and it just generally doesn't really work out that well. I hope that answers your question. Are there others? Should I keep going?
I think that's the only
Okay.
question that we have, and Danielle was enjoying our laughter.
Oh, I see. Oh, how cute. Thank you for your question. That's a really good one. A really good question.
Yeah, I don't think and if anybody does, I'll go ahead and I'll raise your question with Suzanne. So we're going to let Suzanne continue to move forward with the presentation, but I'm still monitoring this chat.
Thank you. So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty here of how to write the release. And before we start breaking down the structure of the release, I want to give you just some rules of thumb that I have followed my entire career and that tend to be the standard when it comes to press release writing. The first is the famous inverted pyramid, which happens to be my next slide, so we'll walk through that together. But the gist of it is that the most important information comes first, and then it funnels down to the least important. And you all know in this day and age, that's because people read very quickly, they skim, and we're lucky if they even go past our first paragraph. Always use AP style, and many of you may not be familiar with it, some of you might be, I don't know, but there are great guidelines online that are easy to look up. In fact, every now and then if I can't figure something out, I'll just Google AP style for whatever word I'm looking at and usually can find an answer pretty quickly. So I actually have a handbook that I use. I'm old school. I use a paper handbook because I was trained on it. But AP style has very specific rules, and I think the ones that would apply most to you guys are things like not capitalizing people's titles. There are different ways to treat cities and states and the different abbreviations to use. And how to work with proper nouns on second reference. So like we would start by saying North Carolina Cooperative Extension, but then on second reference it would just be lowercase e extension. So that's just what comes to mind right away, but that is the standard bearer for press release writing, is using AP style. Keep your paragraph short and use straightforward language. I know it's easy to slip into jargon. I've done it myself. Our college name is so long that we often say CALS, but nobody outside CALS really knows what that means. So I have to be careful of that and try to avoid acronyms and all that good stuff. Word count is important here, and I know this doesn't seem like very many words when you're looking at your page, but like I said earlier, we're lucky if reporters will read past the first paragraph. So if you can keep it short and skimmable, then that's all the better. There are different types of releases. The two that I deal with the most are general announcement releases, grant awards, all that good stuff, project news, and then we have specific event advisories as well, and those can be written in a very distillable who, what, when, where, why format, where you don't have to actually even write complete paragraphs, which is a nice break every now and then. So, and the last piece of advice is to always credit your sources. Anybody you quote in a press release, use their name and their title and the name of their organization. All right, so let's break down press releases. So the very first part of the release, which when I was in school, I was told it was the very first sentence, but these days we have a little more liberty with that, a little more flexibility, and leads can be a little more creative now. They can be a little more featurey, just not long. That's the key. So the release I'm going to walk you through, actually, the lead is in fact the first two very short paragraphs. So it just keep in mind no more than the first two paragraphs. Ideally, the first paragraph would be your lead, and it has the most important information right up front. The body is all your backup information. I usually like to lead off after my lead with a quote from someone relevant to the story, the most relevant person to the story. This guide here has photos, video, and audio. As I mentioned earlier to answer Danielle's question, I would not embed those types of things into your release. I would offer them as resources to the reporter. You can do that at the top of the release. When I walk you through, you'll see that section. You can make, you can actually write out the words note to media and then colon, and then I have photos available for you. Here's a link to a video. You can put those resources up front. You can include links in your release, but I would not try to embed photos, videos, or large files like that could really mess things up as they go through email. And then the very bottom of the release usually is extra information. Sometimes we repeat contact information here. If it's an event, you can guide them to where to go to register. If you have a hashtag you're using in social media, that would be a good place to put it. A website you want to point people to. So all of the little tiny details that are important, but they're not super critical. At the very top of the page will always be the contact information regardless. It's actually before the release begins, so you won't be losing anything by repeating it at the very bottom as well. So the very first part, setting up your press release, and this is the structure as below the word example here. You'll see that we use in CAL. And we always, and I can't believe I didn't write this on the earlier slide, we always copy and paste straight text into the body of the email. We never use attachments, even Word files, because they tend to get caught in spam filters. And it's also one more step. And reporters, if we can make it as quick and easy as possible, then all the better. So it saves them from having to open an attachment, especially if they're on their phones. That can be difficult. So we always copy and paste straight into the body of the email. And this is the format we use. So you'll see at the top, it's clear that it's a press release. We use the word news. You'll see the organization name, always date it, always have a date, and always provide a media contact. That person doesn't always have to be you. If you are writing a story about a program run by someone else in your shop, that person should be the media contact. Or if it's an external partner or friend or a donor or whoever else you're highlighting, if they're willing, those people can be your media contacts. But of course, if you want to be the conduit for the media, if you want to sort of stay in control of that, then you can list yourself or list yourself in addition to the other person. So in this case, I was the contact. So you'll see that I have my name, my organization, phone number, and email. And let me add here a note too. In some cases with unusual circumstances or timely activities, we have listed phone numbers that aren't necessarily our office lines. So say you're putting a release out about an event and you are the on-site media contact, then list the number they can actually reach you at. If that happens to be your cell number, then I would list that number. And the very last line here that begins with microbiomes is the title of the release. And again, you can have some fun with that, but it's key to keep it short. I'm not a big fan of subheads when it comes to press release writing because that's just one more line they have to weed through. But it can be useful if it further explains your activity. It can be good backup information, but again, that's what the lead is really designed to do. So filling up a lot of space with a big headline, I haven't found that to be very effective. Okay, so the lead, like I mentioned earlier, is the first sentence or two, or in my case, short paragraphs. It comes immediately after the headline, and you're really getting the most important information up front. We do not use datelines. That is common practice for a number of organizations. You're welcome to use it if you like, and by that I mean it would be the very beginning of your release. It would say Raleigh, NC, colon. You know, it's just identifying where you are. We haven't found that to be a tool that we need to use because everything we produce comes through the university and our folks know where we are. So that again isn't, you may have seen that, but it's not critical to your release. Thank you, Lou. And again, keep the lead as short and sweet as possible. You can have fun with it, and if you think about it, you really need to try to tell the bulk of your story in that first little bit, which sounds hard, but you'll get the hang of it. So here's the lead for the press release title that we just saw. And you'll see the first three sentences are questions, and it's just my attempt to demonstrate that we don't expect the press to know what the microbiome is. I had no idea what it was until I had to write about it. So I'm trying to say, you know, trying to have a little fun with it. It's kind of a boring topic. It's, you know, a boring conference. Don't tell any of the scientists who presented yesterday, but it's hard for the layperson to understand, and so I try to make it interesting. But the next bit there tells exactly why I'm asking those questions. These questions and more will be under the microscope during Microbiomes, our conference. I tell the name of the conference, who's hosting it, the date, and the location. So if the reporter stops reading right here, they've got all the pertinent details. Even though they haven't seen the URL or the hashtag or the list of speakers, they now can, if they don't want to read any further, they now can Google Microbiome Conference NC State, and they can find everything else they need. So you'll see there I broke a little bit of the rule with having the very first paragraph encapsulate your entire release, but if you back it up quickly and keep it short, then it can still be very effective to have a little bit of a longer lead. The body here. The very next piece that I always like to do is to put a quote in. So here is our dean talking about why the conference matters. Quotes are a great opportunity to editorialize. This is your chance to tell why you think something is great. It's especially helpful to have an outside source come and say why extension is great, or why this program is great, or this event will be helpful to the community. There are lots of things that we can't say in a press release. We can't talk about ourselves in these ways, but you can use a direct quote to do that, and it's a very useful tool. So when you're incorporating quotes, think hard about what you want that person to say and how it can support the news, and use it as a chance to get words in, adjectives, things like that you wouldn't otherwise be able to say about yourself in the rest of the release, which has to remain very factual and unbiased. So I go on to explain the meat of the day. So there'll be these types of presentations on these types of topics, and here is the list of the top speakers to give them a bit of a flavor for what the conference will be. And I will say I'd be shocked if any of the reporters read this far. So again, this is background. This helps someone who really is interested in covering it to know what to expect, and it also gives us a chance to tell about why we think it's important by using that direct quote from the dean. So wrapping it up here, and I truly did break this into chunks, so I'm not leaving out any of the release. In the example here, these are other smaller components of the event. So the Innovation Fair was a smaller component of the event. Our sponsors, and this is a tricky area here. We are often required as part of sponsorship agreements to list them in certain capacities, and that may be the case for you all if you're hosting events in your communities that involve outside organizations. You may have an obligation to list them in your press release, you might not, but it's always a nice gesture of goodwill, I think. And this lives on our website, so our sponsors can come in and see this, and we are grateful for their support. Without them, we couldn't have had this conference. So again, though, you want to stay away from a huge laundry list. So you'll see what I've done here is I listed, we had certain sponsorship levels, so I named the top 3 levels, I think, which includes all those folks you see listed, and then mentioned that there were at least 10 other supporting organizations, and we ended up having about 15 more. So that language kind of kept us safe. Saying at least 10 means could be less, could be more, and it still gets across the idea that we're grateful for the help of these organizations. And then at the very end, I always go to contact information. And I will say in email, especially if you use Google, you can hyperlink words in your message. So say at the very start of the release, when you say the conference title, and in fact it was linked, I don't know why it's not showing now, I had linked the conference title straight to the conference website. And so there you create a one-click opportunity for your reader to go right to the event website. You can also put it in parentheses next to the name of the event if you have concerns that the link might not work or they want to be able to see the URL, that's fine too. And again, I close out here with other small details about the event cost and how that breaks down. And then we did have a hashtag that we were encouraging folks at the event to use, and so I threw it on here in hopes that if anybody was going to come cover it, they would talk about it on social media and use our hashtag. Okay, distribution. And this is just as important as actually writing it, because you don't want to go to all that trouble and not have it be effective. And the very first bullet here, we talked about pasting it into the body of the email. and I'm going to skip around in my bullets here. I would write a personal note at the top. I tend to, depending on how many reporters I have on my list, if it's just a handful, I will write them each a separate email with a little note from me at the top, like, hey, Kathy, here's a release about our microbiome conference coming up in a couple of weeks. I thought it would interest you because I've seen your coverage on X, Y, and Z. Let me know if you have any questions or need any other information from me. So you want to, it's an opportunity to build a relationship with these folks and present the information in a way that they're understanding why they even received it, because reporters get so much email, they get so many pitches and press releases that you don't want to be adding another layer to that of it's almost like spam in many ways. So start off with a note if you can. Of course, if you're sending it to 20 people, then I'll tell you how we get around that as well. Offer yourself as a resource, and then paste the text into the body below your signature. If you're sending to a ton of people and don't have the time or the resources to write them each individually, which is totally fine, I do this as well. If I have, say, more than 6 folks on my list, I address the release to myself, and then I use the blind copy field to dump all those names in, because what that prevents is this person opening an email and the top half of their screen is clobbered with email addresses. And they might get turned off by that and delete it before they've even seen the first line or even the headline of your release. So by using the blind copy field, none of that space has been taken and your release shows up immediately. It also helps protect your privacy in a way, because if you're trying to pitch a story to competing news agencies, then it's nice to keep them on their toes a little bit and not let them know who else is seeing it, and it doesn't dilute your emphasis on wanting their attention to the matter. So in other words, you know, if I really want somebody from our CBS affiliate to come cover a story because they have a perfect reporter and it's such a great fit, but I'm also going to send it to all our other affiliates, NBC, ABC, public television. But you still don't want those folks to see each other's names, because it's just, I just don't think it's just poor form, I guess, and it might create some bad will. So that's just a tip from experience there for both of those reasons. But primarily, the biggest reason to use that blind copy field is to prevent the barrage of email addresses from being the first thing they see. And with event releases, make sure you're giving them at least a week's notice. If you go too much further out than that, it'll get forgotten. But if you wait until the day before or the day of, then you might be out of luck in terms of getting them to come out to cover it. I gotta speed up a little bit here. So the rules for column writing are pretty similar. In fact, and you'll see here about when it's appropriate to write a column. Timeliness, you have an opportunity as an expert here to share that expertise, to provide advice or a list of how-tos, to advocate for particular issues of importance to your audience, and also promoting your events. And I'm going to dig a little deeper here into column writing. Before I do, does anyone have questions about press releases before I move on? And I'm aware that we're running low on time, so let me know. I'll keep going, but you'll let me know, Lou, if there are questions about press release writing. Okay. Columns are, to me, a refreshing change of pace from press releases, because while some of the rules are the same, this is also an opportunity to talk in a different tone. You don't have to be quite so, I don't know what the word is, dry, or quite so worried about being objective, and it's not nearly as fact-based, although they are. I'm not making sense here. It's okay to use the first-person voice in these situations, and as an expert offering advice, you can talk a little more casually. You can use a different tone. You can address the audience in their voice too, so you can speak straight to them. Whereas, so like with a press release, it would be a more informal a more formal third-person style of writing. But with columns, you can say things like, you might want to consider, aerating your lawn right now because it's fall. You can be more casual. You can still be informative, but less structured and less rigid about it, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. Some of the same rules do apply, though, because these will appear in the media. Still continue to use AP style. Avoid jargon, and keep your word count low. And I like this point here. I lifted this from another colleague. Provide a solution. This is what Extension's business is delivering information, sharing knowledge, and providing solutions. So I think columns are an awesome opportunity for you to do that. Structure. So here again, you'll follow the inverted pyramid, but like I was trying to say earlier, it's not quite as structured as a press release. You have a little bit more creative liberty. You can break down the information so it's easy to understand. So the body rules are a little different than a press release. You can use bullets if you'd like, and lists, especially if you're sharing resources. And always offer yourself as a resource at the end, and share partner resources as well if you think that would be relevant and you're okay with, and you let those folks know that they'll be called on as an expert in that situation. We have something?
We do. So
Okay.
Denise would like to know, is it okay to say I in a column?
I do think so, and I actually tried to find one to share with you all, but I had trouble finding that. And especially we, I think, is fine too, because you're representing Extension. So as long as what you're saying is accurate and it makes sense and it's something that you believe is important to your audience, I think it's fine to use the first person voice. I wouldn't lean on it heavily, if that makes sense. So if you're going to write a column about how to, I'm sorry I keep going back to horticulture, how to prune a tree, you could throw in an anecdote in there about how you may have had an experience with that, or that you believe something should go a certain way or has worked for you. So it's totally fine in these cases, but I would still try to stick with the institutional we, if that makes sense, because you are representing Extension as a whole.
Denise has one other question.
Okay.
It says, help us with the words youth.
That's a great question. I should refer to AP style here, but we always use youth, no S, because it can be used as a singular or a plural word. That comes into play a lot with our 4-H coverage. And at the same time, though, it's okay to use a more casual term like 4-Hers or something like that. But definitely, we tend to stay with youth without an S, but I am curious now, and I have to go look later to see what AP says on that. Okay, thank you for the great questions, guys. So I am picking on one agent in particular because she gave me permission, specialist rather, I'm sorry, Charlotte. I know you did. She's wonderful. She's been a great resource for me. She's a horticulture agent in Chatham County, and this is an example of a column she wrote on her page inside the Extension website about nickels for know-how. So here's an example of advocacy. And what Charlotte does with these columns, I'm going to show you a few others, is she posts them to her website here, which I would encourage all of you to use. It looks like a really neat tool. I don't know if it's new to the Extension website redesign or if it's been there for a while, but it's a great way. It's almost like your own blog. And I would, yeah, I would fill it up as you can. This is the perfect venue for all of this information. And then when you get to know reporters or your other stakeholders, you can just point them to this page and they can see everything you've written. That's an aside here. But Charlotte says that she takes these articles, this is the same thing that she sends to the media. She pastes them into her email messages. And the interesting thing about what she's doing that I think all of you have the potential to do is, develop lists that don't just have media on them. She says her list right now has about 1,500 subscribers. She says her Master Gardener volunteers were the first subscribers. Then she publicized the list every chance she could at events and classes. At the end of every article she wrote, everything she posted online. So then over time, she's developed this great database of people. And so I think that's a wonderful way to reach your audiences without relying on the media. At the same time, though, you can keep your media contacts in those lists. You can have subsets of your list if you want to just reach your media folks or just your other constituents, or you can combine them all together. she says here that constant contact is an option that has become available recently for agents. And so that's something to think about in terms of email distribution. So she has a separate list for her gardeners, I guess, which are her home gardeners. And then she also has an industry list, which targets landscape and nursery professionals. And then she has media contacts. So to me, I had never heard of folks doing that, and I think it's a wonderful way to make sure your news is getting out without having to depend on the media reading your press release. At the same time, though, or your column, at the same time, you can still include them in your list, especially after you've reached out and developed a relationship with them. I know that they'd appreciate getting this information just the same. And what here? Okay, I'm sorry, I'll keep going. Our next example is a how-to, and I've referenced some of these. Here she uses bullets and links to other resources that are outside Extension, which is totally fine to do. Of course, it'd be best to link to resources that exist within the organization that you may have written even. We are constantly referring folks to Extension publications out of our office, and so if you've got one that's a great fit, then certainly put that up front in your column. Another example of a how-to here is using Extension resources. So you'll see after that fourth paragraph in the blue copy, she has linked to Extension publications that are highly relevant to the topic. So again, another how-to idea here. And here's an event. And what I like about this is it is short and sweet. It describes briefly what's going to happen, when, where, how to register, and then it offers you a link to more information, which is still an Extension website, which is totally fine. But instead of filling up the whole page with a bunch of details, it's a really quick glance at what's to come. And now that I look at this, I think it was Danielle earlier who asked about photos. Here is a perfect opportunity to put your photos in. Using this tool on the Extension website, it's almost like I said, your personal blog. This is a great chance to add those photos.
We've got a couple of questions.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I am.
All right. So I'm going to go back because they've kind of been they've been piling just a little bit.
Okay.
And so the last one we took was Denise had raised a question about youth and youth.
Okay.
And Suzanne responded to that one and said, yes, it's okay to use the word youth. And you also mentioned we could also use 4-H, or somebody's got a comment on that.
Okay.
We'll talk about it. Kristen Rice-Gira said, what's your opinion on writing about events that have already occurred, such as a conference? Should you mention the date or say timing?
That's a really good question, and I get asked that a lot in my own work. I think it's fine as long as you're showing impact. Clearly, the purpose of any kind of press release before the conference is to help get people there. But if you don't need that, or it's already passed and you'd like to write about it, talk about what happened at the event and how people reacted to that. Try to throw in a quote or two from someone who attended, who can speak on what they learned or what they took away from the event. Try to show impact. And I think it is okay to publish dates. I wouldn't go so far as times because it's already passed, so it's not as relevant. But you can say, you know, at this conference that took place last Thursday at the McKimmon Center in Raleigh, you know, this, and this was discussed, and here, you know, and here is audience reaction, and here's why it's important, and oh, by the way, we're having another one next year, so put this on your calendar, something like that. But I think it's totally fine after the fact. It also could be a good chance, and we're considering doing this, in fact, right now, is to share a link to some images from the conference. We had this huge event yesterday that is actually the basis for the press release sample I shared. And we have great images and a big gallery built, and I'm thinking of tacking on at the end of the release a link to the gallery. Just say, here it is at a glance. So I think that's definitely fine practice.
Then the next comment comes from April. And April, I want to make sure I've gotten your comment correctly. It says, I know we just talked about before the questions Denise had raised about youth or use. And then the other thing that I think Suzanne was trying to say, but you could also, if you don't want to use the word youth, you could say 4-H. And then you mentioned, April, you said, I didn't know for years that 4-Hers is the contraction for 4-H members. Just an FYI, our county IP people don't like it because they read 4-H-er.
Oh, okay.
So this is a point that, you know, for some people it may cause a little bit of confusion. And I think
that's
April
good to
just
know.
wanted to share that. And then
thank you.
Yes, and then Sarah also had a comment just to share you, and that is we have gained 100 plus folks on our email list from the Constant Contact sign up.
That's fabulous.
So Sarah is really sharing with you all from Moore County the value that she's found. And April's back on the internet, so that's great. And Kristen says thank you.
Okay, excellent.
And we've got about 10 more minutes.
Okay, let's wrap up. I'm so glad to hear about your success with Constant Contact. I really think that email marketing, everything I read about it says it's still the way to go. It's been one of our top marketing tools, and I think you guys are smart to be able to put that into play in your work. Again, here with columns, it's the same mechanism for sharing press releases. In this case, though, you could write a quick note and provide a link to your column if it lives on your extension page. If it does not live outside that page, then I would copy and paste it into the body of your email message. Same rules apply about excessive formatting. Don't put logos in. Images can end up garbling up your copy when they go through email. It's just, I've had experiences where it's just made it a big mess. Try to avoid attachments and create context for your reader, for your reporter at the very top, and keep that relationship going by writing a personal note. Use blind copy if you're going to mass email a column. And of course, post it online. Another piece here that I think many of you are engaged in is social media. If you have a Facebook page for your county site, or even your smaller group, if you're a 4-H leader and your 4-H group has a Facebook page, then absolutely share it there. And there's another great chance to use photos and video and all that good stuff. So the key here with distribution in both cases, with press releases and columns to the media, is to make it as quick and easy for them to read as possible, to make it as simple and painless. And also, it's a great chance for you, if you have a relationship or you're trying to build one, to maintain that, to support that, and write a personal note, reach out, tell them why you think they would enjoy this, or why you think they should cover this. I think that would stand out in the sea of other press releases that are just sent without any context. I think that means a lot to them if they actually believe that you have sent this to them for a particular reason, or that you're paying attention to the things they write about. That says a lot. All right, wow, we're done. This is one of my favorite quotes about writing. It always makes me smile, and I thought you all would relate and get a kick out of that. So
I've never heard that.
It's a great, yeah, and I love Hemingway because he is the king of writing short. I'm a big fan of writing short, and that definitely applies with press releases and columns. So,
that's wonderful.
My very last slide here, I want you all to feel free to call on me anytime. We are here for you. My name is here on the right, and Richard Campbell is the Chief Communication Officer for the college. He's my boss, and he is a wonderful guy, and he's got tons of experience with this stuff too. In fact, he's delivered one of Lou's trainings, and I think is probably on the docket for more as we go on. But definitely, please feel free to reach out to me at any time. Email is best, as I'm sure you all can relate. But we are here for you. We're here to help. So thank you for listening today. It's so weird not seeing faces, but I appreciate the interaction, and I hope this has been helpful.
So I want to check in with folks. We've got a few more minutes. Does anybody have any remaining questions for Suzanne? Sherry Lynn says, thank you for the helpful information. Yeah, you can certainly put your comments. Thank you. I'm hearing very relevant from Denise, so you all can. And if you all have a list of topics, I'm going to send out the PowerPoint presentation to everybody in a few minutes. If you have a list of topics for 2017, please get those to me. I know several people have commented about the value of these sessions, and so I keep thinking Friday's not the best day for them, but maybe it is. So any other questions or comments from anyone? And I'm going to give you just a few minutes. John, thank you for your help up front on keeping us grounded as Suzanne and I were trying to work through that reverb there. Karen Neal, very relevant. Thanks so much. Oh, Karen, I think Suzanne really enjoyed this. She's obviously in her element, is she not? And we'll see everybody else later. If you're going to the fair, going to enjoy the last part of the weekend, I hope you're doing that. Or if you're going to volunteer out in the eastern part of the state with some of our colleagues who are kind of still working through some of the things that Matthew brought. Danielle, he says, well, where I'm located in northeastern North Carolina, we do not have access to North Carolina TV. How would you suggest us building relations with the southeastern VA news outlet? Really no one has reached out to them that I know of.
I think that's a great idea, Danielle. I really do. If those are the channels that your audiences are watching, then absolutely reach out to them. I think that's a great idea. And in fact, I think that is relevant also in the western part of the state. A lot of the South Carolina media cover some of our mountain communities, and absolutely reach out to them, especially if nobody else has. It's a great opportunity for you.
Thank you for raising that question, Danielle. Let's see, and how would you say?
What I would do to reach those folks is, as best you can, dig into their websites and figure out who covers what. You know, I have a pretty good handle here in the Triangle on which reporters tend to cover which things in the TV press, and try to reach out individually. So if you find the person you think is best for one topic, then I would reach out with that context. And by reach out, I mean, I always have best luck with email. Try that as a first step. Write the person, introduce yourself, offer to meet, to sit down for coffee for 20 minutes, and use that as an opportunity, if they accept, to share what's going on in your organization and ask them what they're covering and what kinds of things they're looking for. And I think that will be the beginning of a very positive relationship. If they don't take you up on the offer to meet, then I would still just continue to communicate through email, by phone, offering yourself as a resource and trying to get to know them. Consider it almost like building a friendship in a way. I hope that helps. Okay, they do not cover a lot of news in our areas unless it is something really horrible.
So give them a news story to cover.
That's tough. I hate it, but that is the mindset of so much of the broadcast media. It is a tricky position you're in, but I still don't think it hurts to reach out and make a personal contact. Don't just blanket the news desk with your stuff. Find a real person and reach out. And you can always say, if I'm barking up the wrong tree, then who do you think I should be talking to? They might say, oh, Sam covers that. Here's his email. You know, I think personal contact is always best. Thank you, Danielle, for your great questions.
And Danielle, I really encourage you to get out there and meet those folks, because I think you do have a lot of great stories, and I do think the news media, in spite of how some of them say if it bleeds, it leads, we'll want to have more of those colorful stories that Suzanne was talking about, the human interest. I think we're ready for that. Yeah, that's great. All right, you all, we are going to shut off. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We certainly appreciate it. And have a great weekend. Take care.